recorded. You're not going to be seen. Yeah, you're not going to be seen because I've put it on Spotlight, so it would stay on Chris. So it'd be more like a radio show. I'm not going to be seen. Okay.
That's worrying.
I mean, Chris, basically, it's explaining what a role of speech and language. I'm sure everybody knows already. If anybody wants to ask a question, then please feel free to put your hand up, and Chris will be able to answer the question. But like I said, I think I spoke too much over the last 4 months, and I think I can get everybody else a chance to speak. So yes, you did say earlier that from the previous speech and language webinar that you did, you've had increase of delegates, followers.
It's weird. So I before you, Venessa, I didn't have any confidence in doing webinars, and I didn't talk on camera. It was, I know my stuff, I'm able to deliver, but I don't do webinars. I don't put myself out there. And part of it is, on a one-to-one, it's easy because you're answering questions, it's personal. When you're delivering to an audience that you don't have a clue who they are, you know, no information about them, it's really, I find that really tricky. So when I was at uni, I always failed the presentation element because I couldn't present. I used to stammer all the way through. And because of the webinar you asked me to do about 6 weeks ago, I've set up lots of webinars since. And the webinars I've set up, I think one of we did a report writing one for professionals, and then parents have kind of popped in and kind of learned about report writing so they can understand what the reports that they're getting. And that sold 200 tickets in about 48 hours. And then there's another one coming off the back of that to go with going to a tribunals and being an expert witness and what the expectation is. And again, I've aimed it at professionals, but the way that I'm wording it, because it's an informal webinar, it's very much a what as a parent you do when you get to a tribunal. How am I treated? What do I need to wear? What do I need to X, Y, and Z? But I only do that because you said I got some okay feedback on the last one, so I was like, all right, okay, I can do this. My wife would kill me if she's right at the start, because she was like, no, don't do it because you won't be able to do it. You've got it in here, and I'm brilliant at writing things down, but when it comes out of here, it just goes off in random directions. But no, I thank you for the sense, the confidence to be able to do this. So
believe me, I'm scared being on camera, but I had to. But another thing was, I was just saying, you've got ADHD? Late diagnosed?
Blessed. Yes,
Early
blessed.
Diagnosed?
Yeah.
Was it late or early diagnosed?
Oh, late, yeah.
Really? So basically, it's encouraging anybody that's watching this or anyone that's listening to this as a podcast that as an adult, having ADHD, it's not a bad thing. It's about how to support yourself. Like you said, you didn't know if you could do this webinar because obviously, as you said, your mind is going very fast. And I know people say that I do a lot, but when you know you're passionate about something, it's about making sure that you can help that family or help the individual. So thank you for joining us again. And I hope that you remember me when you get so busy.
No, this is the best thing about lockdown. I can do this type of work and then I can go back down and see the kids, rather than what I used to do is I used to do the work and then be stuck in a car for 4 or 5 hours. Hello.
What are you doing?
I'm on a presentation. Do you want to say hello?
Hello.
Hello.
This is my oldest.
Hello.
So she thought I was just chatting to myself online, so she thought she'd pop in. Right, go down to the house, okay? Can you close the door? Thank you. Izzy, go downstairs. This is the best thing about working from home as well.
Yeah, so basically, I suppose the advice to anybody is that, you know, having a webinar is good, because I know some parents are concerned about, due to lockdown, how can you assess the child or adult whilst in lockdown, because they're not at school no more. So a lot of the challenges a child may have had at school, they may not have at home. And those the children are homeschooled, home educated. How can you assess the autistic? Well, how can you assess the child?
So one of the big things that happened during lockdown is one of the big test providers is Pearson. So Pearson's it's a humongous company, and they've developed all the assessments that speech therapists and educational psychologists use. I know OT assessments are there as well. And at the beginning of lockdown, Pearson made a decision to provide all of their resources for free for people that are qualified to deliver them. So I used to do one assessment, so drive anywhere. So based in Wales, I used to do one assessment maybe in Devon or one in Stratford or one anywhere in the UK and then drive home. So it'd be like 5 hours in the car each way, an hour and a half to assess. So it was like an 11.5-hour day just for one assessment. Now I can, because of Pearson opening it up, I can share screen. I can share, it's called on Zoom, you can allow them to annotate, or you can allow them to take control of your computer and the sound and things. So I can get a child to point to different things I want to point at using my cursor. So all the standardized assessments that I would have previously used in a school or home setting, I can do online. So now, and this is where it's gone a little bit crazy in the last few weeks, I'm now doing about 2 to 3 assessments every single day rather than one every other day, because I needed the time to chill out after driving 700 miles the previous day. So now my workload has just peaked, and I'm going to kind of work out a way of reducing what I'm doing in order to make sure that I've kind of maintained, in a sense, my sanity, because there's so much to do. But essentially, the vast majority of speech and language assessments can be done online. They can be delivered via Zoom or by Microsoft Teams, and I think Skype has the same facility. And so that's the standardized part. So the standardized part there, obviously, it allows you to compare children with their peers, so directly with their peers, and you've got set ways of delivering it. In addition to that, so one of the standardized assessments that I've used for years is a questionnaire. So you send the questionnaire to home and you send it to school. And I usually ask mum and dad to fill it out separately and then school to fill it out. And what you do is you get a set of scores from these questionnaires. And they're in, I think there's 10 different domains that it kind of looks at. And it's specifically around children with social communication difficulties. So that's the children's communication checklist. It's a very, very simple form to fill out. You score behaviours in kind of from 0, 1, 2, or 3 in terms of how frequent you see them. But that gives me an ability to imagine where the child's skills are across different settings from the eyes of different people. And it stops me from just getting a standardized assessment and saying, right, this snapshot is everything about the child, which clearly it isn't. We need as much information as possible. And then other things that I've done, I assessed a non-verbal child with autism a few weeks ago in Stratford via Skype, and we did it by, well, the biggest part of assessing a child who's non-verbal is to observe what they do and kind of see what behaviours they use, how they, in a sense, manipulate their environment, etc., in order to get what they want. And we did the whole thing via Skype with parents. I trained parents for a good half an hour beforehand. This is what I want you to do. These are sort of things I want you to set up. And we managed to do the whole thing via Skype. And then in addition to the questionnaires that I sent and the feedback from school, I was able to get a very good picture as to where the child is. So it is possible to do these assessments online. And there's no kind of replacement for being face-to-face with the family. The challenge is when I'm assessing little ones, I've never met a child under 5 where when I'm assessing them, they don't try and climb over the top of me. And I've been brought up with tiny kids. My mum was a childminder. I've got 4 of my own. And I'm used to that kind of rough and tumble and having children just climbing all over me. And with the current lockdown and this whole having to wear a mask, etc., it's not conducive to doing that. And I also wouldn't want to assess a child who's kind of under 5 wearing a mask with I'd have to think is wearing glasses. I have to wear a mask and then sellotape the top of it so my glasses don't steam up. And I look peculiar. And I know this is the new norm, but I don't think it doesn't create a typical situation. So when you're looking at what the child's doing, it doesn't really tell you what they would typically do, because you've suddenly become this alien in this random alien in a suit in their house with their glasses taped over. It looks weird. So you're not going to get what you would typically get from them. So I think that's where online and then the questionnaires and then kind of observing them via Skype, etc., can help. And then other things I get families to do is I get them to send me videos via WhatsApp. So it's encrypted, etc. And we must take a video of our children, probably 2 or 3 minutes per child every single day. We're not trying to document our children's development. We just do it, like, to send family, etc. And I think most parents do. And what you find is if you go into the video section of your phone, there'll be thousands and thousands of videos, and these videos are crucial if we want to look at how a child is communicating. So even if, so when I'm looking at the baby, the 6-month-old, we might be doing a video of her having her first spoonful of porridge, but the amount of communicative behavior she's doing is helpful in terms of, right, where is she developmentally? But also, when you're observing a child in that sort of situation, and you're not seeing these communicative behaviors, you're not seeing them kind of looking for the spoon, you're not seeing them kind of flap in excitement when something's coming towards them, you're not seeing them look once they've finished the mouthful back at you in order to say, right, oh, I want some more, then that's when you start to have questions as well. So yeah, I mean, I think this is the problem, Venessa. You asked me one question and I just carry on going. But this is it. You can assess online. It's not a replacement for face-to-face, but current face-to-face isn't something I'm really willing to do that often, because you're not getting an accurate picture compared to what we used to have. So fingers crossed we get this sorted and we can actually go back to just not having to wear masks, etc., so that we can have a typical assessment.
I mean, another question, I know Gemma came back, is obviously behaviour equals communication, whether it's good or bad. But like with me, my experience looking at speech and language, as I said, I knew you saw it everywhere. Me, Tanya and Bridget, we held a conference yesterday with Dr. Judy Eaton. And one thing that we did notice is that when you're at a tribunal, when we're reading reports, when you're in a team around the child, it seems to be in a way that sometimes those parents who've got dyslexia, who have got their own additional needs, that gets overlooked. See, sometimes, and I'm going to be very honest, most of the time, if we know that our child is exhibiting certain behaviours, it's like we have been told that we have exaggerated, and then by the time the child gets into later school, or was it later primary school? Year 6, going into year 7, you find sometimes with some of the families now that FII seems to creep in, because they're telling us that we are not telling the truth. So as a speech and language therapist, I consider ADHD coming there, speech and language therapist, how would you able to support families? Because we were told sometimes people don't like to be filmed, but because of the time that we're in now, it shows that these are the evidence that we have to use. Because if not, I know that if I didn't have a video where my son bit himself, when someone was doing a documentary on me, he said, I'm going to go tell the head teacher. Guarantee when he got to school, I've got the videos there, he told him that I bit him. Right. And then on the video, the same what he said was there. Don't see that in my files. So it shows that if you have got evidence, it is good, but it's just be careful where you show it out, because of
definitely
the child.
No, totally. I think if you put it on the other end of the scale, young parents want to show what their children are able to do. Okay, so this is the opposite end. This is where you've got children where you're like, oh, I want to show grandma who's up north a video of Oshan saying his first words. Get the camera out, right? Oshan, say it again. Zip. You can't get, so when it's called, I mean, the psychology term is observer's paradox, and the observer's paradox is all about when you know you're being observed, your behavior changes, and it's not something it's not something you typically have power over, but you just change. And this is why if we look at things like the ADOS assessments, the diagnostic assessment, they're usually filmed, but they're filmed by cameras in the corners of the room, so the child doesn't know they're being filmed. You're not on this big VHS camera pointed at them. They're just there, and so that's one aspect of it. So the fact that when you introduce a camera, you'll typically change the behavior. I mean, Big Brother was a good example of it, that eventually you get used to it and you might revert back to what was typical. But the second you put the camera out there, children nowadays just shy away from the camera because they've seen it so often. They've had it pointed in their faces from like day 0. And then others may play up to it. One trick I've got is my Apple Watch. There are many other watches you can get, but I press record on this watch. So when I go into an assessment, I record a voice note on the watch, and it starts, so I get consent from the parents before I arrive, and and I press record, and it records absolutely everything, and then it sends it to my phone. There's a little app you can use to transcribe it if you want to, but what it does is, because it's on my wrist, no one notices it. It's not flashing, it just records everything that's said, and there's lots of apps that you can do. I mean, an old transcript, like the old transcription machines, like the little dictaphone things, that can be used in the same way. But what you're doing is you're gathering evidence in what I see as a less invasive way. So you're not going to notice it, and therefore you're able to gather that evidence. But the challenge is, I mean, I see it a lot where children are described as doing X, Y, and Z at home, and then at school they're described as doing a lot less, or their behaviour peaks at home, and therefore when you're communicating with the school, then the school's like, oh no, we have no issues whatsoever. But I could say the same about my little one. So my little one's 7, and she's a little angel at school, kind of top of the class. No one would imagine she'd do anything wrong. And because she's a typical 7-year-old, shake her up through school, she becomes a little bit anxious, she gets a bit stressed about things at school. She comes home, and because she's comfortable and she's secure in her environment at home, she can pop. And we then know how to, well, I say we then know, but we know that the way we should manage it. And then there's times as parents where you struggle to manage it in the way that you know you should be doing, especially because I work in the field. But this is the issue. So you are going to see different behaviours and different communicative behaviours at school than you are at home. And this is where sometimes, you know, there's never an excuse to saying that a parent isn't telling the truth. But when we're looking at what's presented, it's always interesting to think, right, well, this is something that is definitely happening at home, and it's not happening at school, but why is it not happening at school? And one of the big examples I had for a child yesterday, I did an assessment, online assessment, and he was a little angel, and apparently he has pathological demand avoidance. So he has this diagnosis, this PDA diagnosis, and at school, he's a little bit tricky at school, but at home, he's an absolute nightmare to work with. So parents really, really struggle with this child at home. And when I was doing my assessment, because I know what I'm doing, I'm able to use strategies in order to create a situation so that I can do the assessment. And I think that's the challenge, because if you've got someone who knows what they're doing in terms of what strategies to use, especially with children with PDA, then the challenge is they'll get through the assessment, and then the report might not state all the difficulties because you've not seen them. So I think there's a really important section in all reports that needs to be there, and it's kind of the parent experience and the facts, and it has to be the facts that the parents present. So it's not about all parents. It's making sure you're objectively stating what parents are saying, and also lots of parents, if they haven't been able to. So I did a 16-year-old a few weeks ago, and mum couldn't video him doing what he was doing, but she sent me voice notes, and the voice notes gave me a perfect picture as to the situation and the threats and everything that was happening. But if she'd have put the video in front of him, he would have stopped immediately and then started again once the video's away. So again, like I say, it's using using technology in a way that you can gather the information, and also considering that the child is going to present differently in different environments. So I hope that answered that question again.
It's great. Another one came through from Tanya. She said the Maudsley Rootley use a system where they have a team behind a screen in another room. Howard D, who was a teenager, objected to this when they advised her at the start of the meeting. Right. This was part of an ADHD assessment. Is this used in other settings, and what are your views on this?
So I set up me and a clinical psychologist, Pauline, set up a multidisciplinary assessment service, so an independent service. We worked a lot internationally, but we set one up in Stratford out of her clinic, and we put in the two-way mirror, and the two-way mirror with the microphone and a camera at the opposite side of the room. What's interesting is you have to get consent from the parents to do it, but as you get an older child, I think it's really important you get consent from the child, because you are essentially recording a part of their life. And I don't know where things stand in terms of what age you have to get consent, but what we would always do before the ADOS, so it's usually with a diagnostic assessment such as the ADOS, so the Autism Diagnostic Observation Scale, whichever, and the ADOS. So we take the child into the recording room first, we'd show them how it works, and then we'd say, right, mum and dad, so you, depending on which module, so that depends on the age of the child, the parents might be in the room with the child, or they might be in the observation room. And I mean, for me, I think it can work really well. Again, you've created a bit of an observer's paradox because the child now knows they're being observed, but but when it comes to an ADOS, especially in the NHS, what usually has to happen is you have to have a record of that assessment, and the record of the assessment is usually the recording of the assessment. So all the teams I've worked in, independently and also in the NHS, we do have these two-way mirrors, but I think it's important when you're using a two-way mirror to make sure you take the individual in so that they can see that it's present. I've worked in a secure mental health hospital in Orpington's over in Kent. And in this one, we've got ages 13 up to 18, and it's usually kind of, they're detained under the Mental Health Act after extreme self-harm. So these are children and children and adolescents where they've, and they're typically on the spectrum, and they're detained for usually 3 months, but this 3-month assessment period could last a lot longer, and they're detained in a sense relatively long term. And the assessments that we do there are, again, we use the screen. When I was there, we use the screen in order to observe, in order for someone to observe the assessment taking place. But again, it's not like the FBI where people are sat behind the screen and you're not supposed to know they're there. I feel we have to respect the individual no matter what their age is, and we have to show them what the setting is behind, explain why it's being recorded, if it's being recorded, and explain why other people are not going to be present in the room and they're going to be sat on the other side of the screen. So no, I mean, I agree. I mean, lots of clinic settings will have this type of approach, and I think it can work really well. The challenge again is, like I say, it's down to the individual then knows they are being assessed, and if you know you're being assessed, and your behaviour will change, or your behaviour will likely change.
Thank you. I know no one's asking questions, so I've got a question. In regards to adults, because again, when I look at my son and daughter, 17 and 19, my son's got a diagnosis of autism ADHD, severe receptive expressive language, and only recently said that he's got learning disabilities, which was never ever picked up. Right. My daughter, older one, 19, she's got moderate language difficulties, but everyone believes that she is on the autistic spectrum or ADHD, but people still deny it. So my question is now, how do we engage with speech and language for an adult when you talk about 16 plus?
So adult services to speech therapy, they usually form under the learning disability team. So it's a community learning disability team. I worked in one in Waltham Forest for about 18 months. So it's the NHS one, so it's a Redbridge and Waltham Forest one. And the vast majority, so paediatric speech therapy teams, you might have 15, 20 therapists. Again, they're totally stretched. There's not enough resource out there in order to meet need. In adult services, you're looking at 2 to 3 therapists. And your issue with adult services, those 3 therapists also, even though it's an adult learning disabilities team, which is what autism typically falls under with adults, the challenge is that team also has to deal with something called dysphagia, which is eating and drinking difficulties. And as you can imagine, dysphagia or eating and drinking difficulties is a life and death situation. And we have kind of set guidelines as to how quick you have to go see somebody. If a care home or a care setting or supported living or a family report questions around someone's kind of safety of someone's swallow. So the priority of how time works in these settings is often it's your first 90% of contact time is dysphagia cases and the travel back and forth to see them. Because you can imagine these services cover nursing homes, they cover supported living, they cover absolutely everywhere except hospital settings usually. And therefore, that 10% at the bottom is the amount of time available to access in terms of individuals with autism, but it's usually individuals that already have the diagnosis. And it's not usually that much in terms of direct contact. It's usually through a parent, a carer, or a support worker, in order to look at kind of strategies to best, in a sense, enhance skills. I struggle from a speech therapy perspective on who can see. Well, 17 falls under paediatrics still, so you're fine with 17. 19 is, it can fall under adult unless they have an education healthcare plan, and if they have an education healthcare plan, then the 19-year-old would fall under the paediatric service still. So I guess that's how you'd have to access it. But I did an assessment. There's a parent advocate out there, Sunil, and he referred an adolescent. I think she was, well, not adolescent. She was 22, and this family had concerns. She'd been given a diagnosis of autism at 16, and then I was asked to assess her as part of an education healthcare plan. And at age 22, she got her first education healthcare plan. So from 0 to 22, concerns were raised in school, in college, all the way through. Nobody addressed those concerns. Eventually, parents found an advocate who knew what he was doing, and he referred on for an assessment. And lo and behold, it was clear immediately there's a language disorder there. So it wasn't just a diagnosis of autism she had, but she also had a developmental language disorder, which had been completely missed throughout school. And so I guess this is the problem. If the issues are there and schools are not identifying them, and parents are identifying them, but they're not sure which professional they fall under, because ed psych tends to be the catch-all for everything in schools. And if school is, and so you've got parent with concerns, but they're not sure who the concerns need to be directed to. Essentially, it should go back to the SENCO, and the SENCO should say, oh, well, actually, it makes sense to have a speech and language therapy referral, and then going straight via the NHS. But the later it gets, the less resources there are. And this is why, I mean, as an independent therapist, you can never be quiet, because there's just there's so much need. But for a 17 and 19-year-old, you should still be able to self-refer to the NHS speech and language therapy team. So there shouldn't be an issue in terms of self-referring, because it's a speech therapy in the NHS isn't something you need a GP referral to. Sometimes you need a hearing assessment before he's seen as a kind of a precursor, but every parent and family is allowed to self-refer into speech therapy in the NHS. And there's usually a form, if you Google it, within your local authority or within your NHS trust. There's a simple form in order to access that service. So it isn't impossible. The challenge is the resources for older people. So technically, ages 12 and above are the ones that have less and less resources, because the evidence around, especially around autism, is that early intervention is key. So therefore, ages 5 up to 5 as well, you should be plugging the most intervention, and then it kind of tails off, which it shouldn't. So when you've got a 17 or 19-year-old, you can imagine how they've, in a sense, slipped through the gaps. And I guess if you get into speech and language therapy within the NHS and concerns are raised around social communication, then a paediatrician referral or a child and adolescent psychiatrist referral should be triggered. And then they could be part of the social communication pathway. The annoying thing about how things work at the moment is, as a parent, you can't refer to the social communication pathway. It has to be done by a professional, and the professionals are the gatekeepers, but it might take you 2 years to see the professional. So I think that answers the question, that it is possible, and it is possible through the NHS, and you can self-refer. But again, like everything, and I think you'll all, as parents, will realise it's a fight. It's either a fight, or you need an unlimited pot of money to do everything privately. And it isn't the way that it should be.
Okay, thank you. Esther, would you like to say something? I know you got your hand raised, so if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, morning, everybody.
Morning.
Morning.
Yeah, my question first. I will start from this way. My son, we are doing speech language therapy since 2014. But now the talking is coming. But when he have to express himself to talk, he say bad word, like today I want to ask her, when they diagnosed him, they say he got, do you use that one word now? I just write in here. You say severe or a speak language. Can you explain that one for me a little bit?
So the diagnosis he's got is severe speech and language. What was the last word? Was there a delay or disorder in there?
Yeah, he delay everything. He delay on the writing, reading, talking, everything. He got autism, ADHD, difficult learning. Yeah. And then we are thinking he got a PDF as well, because now when he's talking, examples, he talked to the PE yesterday. PE was very sad. He was telling the PE in the park, say, you are not my daddy. By the way, he have to explain it. He don't say full sentence. But as a mom, I know what he's talking about, but the PE was very sad. He say he's not talking to him a good way. He know what he's doing. He's talking to him polite way. But he have to say the sentence is a full sentence. He make the sentence needs the sentence. So because I want to know what is a severe language.
So there's lots of things going on there, and I'm going to try and unpick it all. So you've got the ASD diagnosis, so the autism diagnosis. Yeah. So the autism diagnosis, from that perspective, that's the area that's going to affect his social communication and social interaction skills. So then you've got your typical things. You've got your difficulty with back and forth conversation. It's what we call reciprocal social interaction. So a child might be able to produce a sentence, but he might not produce a sentence in order to have a conversation back and forth.
Exactly.
So that's the communication aspect of autism. You'll maybe have difficulties with recognizing facial expressions, difficulties with having a varied intonation. So they might be relatively monotone or use the incorrect intonation for when asking questions, for example. When you've got that, you may not also understand when someone's asking you a question because you can't decode the rise in intonation. So you hear questions as statements and therefore you may not answer them. You might have difficulties decoding and understanding facial expressions. And this is what falls under the autism. The other part of it might be, and I could list off for hours, but one of the other key parts is, as part of the autism, is what we call theory of mind. And that's a difficulty understanding that other people have a different mind, in a sense, that other people have different experiences and different kind of opinions and feelings, and therefore not realizing that someone, when you say something, you may be offending somebody because they feel they've got a different experience and a different life and different culture, etc. to you. So there's a lot going on from the autism perspective. And then from the language perspective, the fact that they've said severe, so when we do assessments, we're able to, using these standardized assessments, we're able to work out where a child falls in relation to their peers. And there's set criteria when we say whether it's mild, moderate, or severe. And severe... Sorry.
Before he was a non-verbal, and then they say he got... the word come to my head again, God. Before he was non-verbal, so we use 1 word, 2 word, 3 word before to join the word together.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. And he's managed, and now he uses sentences.
Mm-hmm. He uses sentence, but not correct way. When he's using, like he wants to tell the person something is wrong with your brain, he say, "What is in your brain, though?"
Okay.
What is in your brain is not good.
So, and this is where you've got the interaction of the autism in terms of the difficulty with social skills and understanding that he could offend other people.
How about language disorder?
The language disorder is...
Well, what does it mean?
So the difference between delay and disorder. So delay usually means that a child hasn't developed their speech and language skills, so their ability to create sentences and follow instructions in the most basic terms, and that they will catch up. A disorder is where things have developed, but randomly developed, and therefore you've not got so you've not seen a nice typical development in terms of speech and language skills. You've seen these random spikes here and there. And when you describe a child that was non-verbal, 1 or 2 words, and then sentences, and then the sentences, so some of the sentences and the grammar, etc., in the sentences may be relatively advanced to where the expressive language skills are. That's where it's presented as a disorder. But when you're assessing a child and looking at whether it's a delay or disorder, you have to consider everything. And in my experience, when it's an individual that has a diagnosis of autism, it's very rare for it to be a language delay, and it's more likely to be a language disorder, because kind of the way that they have acquired and the way that they use language.
Yeah, they put a language disorder as well. They put everything delayed, language disorders, severe autism, but now it's improved a little bit. It's depending how I'm working with him. But the people around us, because they don't understand him, he have meltdown easily. Every 2 minutes he can have meltdown, because the people, they are not understand what he tried to express himself to say. They are taking his information around the way. So how can I help those people who is around me? So
you're the expert on your son. Okay, nobody else knows your son better than you do, and therefore
those people, they are working with me, so they are asking me. I need to make a pressure on him. Like yesterday, the key PA was telling me, you need to tell him no, not to, because he said bad one on me, and later he said, oh, sorry mommy, and then in the park he said to me, fucking mom, you are bad, I'll kill you with the knife. And then the man was away from him, and the man was, where are you going to get in the knife from? And then from there he have big meltdown. Everybody was asking him on there. And then he was insulting the man, and everybody was looking at us. And then the man said, when he was saying that to me, I need to stand myself with him and talk to him very well, because he know what he's doing. I said no. And then I didn't say anything to the man. When we come home, I was starting explain everything to the man. I go to website, I send some information to the man to read them.
So when it comes to the situation that you're in terms of kind of other people not understanding your child's or your son's kind of strengths and difficulties, the most important thing right now is getting it onto paper and having in a sense a pen picture that states, this is what my son is able to do when he's happiest. This is what he's able to do when he's most stressed. And you obviously when you're stressed, you usually see a reduction in your ability to do something. So in a situation where things have broken down, such as what you've explained, then the likelihood is anybody using language, so is anyone trying to talk to him and talk him down at that point, those words are not going to go in. They're just going to go straight over his head. And essentially, that's just going to, in a sense, it's going to make the situation more stressful. So you're the expert, and therefore, what I feel would be beneficial is you writing down your son's strengths and your son's difficulties. So it's really clear, this is what it's easy to get him to do. This is what he's really good at telling us. This is when he's really good at communicating. And then these are the situations in which he's more challenging. And in these situations, this is what I do as a parent that works best. And what should have happened, so when I've been in these situations before, it's usually me and a clinical psychologist, so speech therapy and clinical psychologist, looking at the whole event, thinking about what happened before, thinking about the behavior, then thinking about the consequence of the behavior, and then putting a plan together that looks at the language levels, that looks at the behavior itself, and how we can kind of, in a sense, make sure this doesn't happen again. And if it happens again, the strategies in place in order to develop, in a sense, to manage it, and allow him time after the event when things have calmed down in order to reflect what happened. So go back over what happened, and you can do things like, things that we used to use is like common strict conversations, where you draw out the event with him, and then you kind of show him the two people and what happened, and then what the other person was thinking, because he's not able to put himself into the perspective of the other person. So so there's a way of kind of drawing this out and allowing him to learn from it. And then the other thing that you could do is what we call the social story. And social stories they get bandied about all the time, this word. Social story is pretty much a story in the person's perspective at their level, so what a level they understand, with words they understand, that describes a situation and the best outcome from that situation. So what we'd expect as a good outcome from that situation. And that way, when you're in the zone and you're having a meltdown in the park, you don't try and do anything. You don't try and draw things. You don't get a story out. You just try and calm the situation down. Use minimal language. If possible, you use, we used to carry lanyards around, and the lanyard might just have a really simple stop picture on it, or it might have a red, like a red traffic light, and that just tells the person, right, we're in a situation where I need to calm down. And then from that, we have strategies in order to move the person who's highly stressed at that point to a kind of mentally to a position where they're able to calm themselves down. So we'll have strategies that can help them. And that might be fiddle toys, it might be a stress ball, it might be, right, let's go for a run. There might be something we can do in order
to... So we have to hold it to take it to the park. Everywhere we are going, we have to take everything with me. No,
so these types of things that you, so the types of tools I'm describing, a lot of them, when he's stressed, they're not going to work. They're things that you can do before and things that you can do after, in order if something has happened. But when he's with a key worker, before the key worker works with him, if you give them a really straightforward, might be a post-it note with some, these are the top 5 things about my son. In order, these are things he likes, things he doesn't like. These are triggers for difficult behaviours. And when there is a difficult behaviour, this is the best way to bring him round. That's the information you need to be sharing. And the key worker should have that with them at all times, even when it's a familiar key worker. And then when you're in the park, having something, I feel, we know that individuals with autism, lots of them do benefit from having visuals. And I think no matter what your language level is, even if it's a severe language disorder or it's a mild language disorder, for example, it's helpful that for a visual, if you associate that visual with calming down or knowing you need to stop something, having a visual that just says, right, stop, or stop, and then another visual that says, right, let's go for a walk, or something that in order to get him from where he is to where you want him to go. And then the other thing you could do, I mean, there's literally hundreds of strategies that would have to be tailored to him. But another thing might be a next board. So now this is happening, right, next, right, we're going to go for an ice cream. And it's not rewarding the difficult behavior. It is diverting from the difficult behavior to create a positive outcome. So, but again, these are behavioral strategies. And I mean, I'm just a speech therapist, and behavioral strategies are usually devised by kind of educational or clinical psychologists, if you want them to be as effective as possible. And this is where, I mean, parents and their children and adolescents sit at the core of the team, but the team has to include everybody so that we can use all the tools and the evidence, the research, etc., to make sure when these situations happen, we know how to either not avoid them, but we know how to work around them and then create a positive outcome. The last thing we need is for your son to be in that situation and say it to the wrong person and get the wrong reaction. I know Venessa was talking before the call started about the kind of the prevalence of undiagnosed difficulties, and the prevalence of undiagnosed difficulties in individuals that then get arrested and they're not aware of these difficulties. And it's a huge problem that needs to be tackled.
Yeah, thank you very much. Another question is very important for me at the moment. I'm discussing with the PA. His mood changes easily. When he wants to do this one, he changes quickly. He starts to do it, and then he changes to another one. He changes to another. His mood changes quickly. Who can help me on this way? Is it OT? Because he got sensory issue a lot. Is it OT who have to help me, or psych cancer? So,
it's a team approach.
Who cannot help me for that one?
When it comes to this, there's one approach that I've seen be very successful, and it's called zones of regulation. Zones of regulation is a traffic light system where you, with zones of regulation, it's an approach that's typically used by OTs, but speech therapists use it as well. And psychologists have I feel, a more technical way of doing this, but zones of regulation is basically, it's a traffic light system, so red, amber, green. Green is when you're completely relaxed, and when you're green, you do nice green activities that keep you relaxed. When you're amber, you do activities that help you go back up to green. And then when you're red, we have strategies that get you to amber and then to green. And again, they're totally personalized. So when I'm stressed, the best thing I can do is run up to this lodge where I'm hiding up here in the garden, lock the door, put the blinds down, put the PlayStation on, and pretend everything else doesn't exist. I'm able to use my strategies to reduce my stress levels. When other people are stressed, they might grab something to calm them down. They might have a cigarette, might have a glass of wine, they might go for a run. When individuals with autism are stressed, they need their own tailored strategies in order to bring them from the level they're at, which might be red, it might be green, it might be red, or it might be amber, and allow them to go up to the next level to calm themselves down. So yeah, I mean, an OT, so an occupational therapist, or an educational psychologist, or a clinical psychologist, or CAMS, I mean, all these individual services or professionals can help. But I'd look into zones of regulation because it's a really lovely approach, and there's tons of videos on Google you can get for it. You can buy the resources online, and there's a lot. I mean, Google's great for kind of learning about things like this, and it is a strategy that's evidence-based that can work. I just think when you're looking at CAMS, you're looking at a 12 to 18 month waiting list, unless it's extreme, and then you're still looking at a 12-month waiting list. And therefore we need to think, right, if I can't access this, I can guide you in terms of this is an approach that might be suitable, and then trying to get access to a professional such as an OT or a speech therapist is the best way.
Thank you, Esther, for that question.
Thank you.
Gave a lot of information.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right, the next question I've got, and this is from Gemma. How can you become a speech therapist? What kind of training you need?
Oh wow, it's my favorite topic. So there's two different courses to do speech therapy. There's the BSc, which is the Bachelor of Science, which is either a 3-year or 4-year degree. If you've got a degree already, then you could do the Masters, which is the MSc, the Master of Science. And again, there's quite a few universities that do that. So they're the two main routes, either the BSc or the MSc. So it's a degree or a Master's. I did a degree in linguistics and then did a separate degree in speech therapy. To get onto the course is incredibly difficult these days. I think there's the same number of courses, but less places available. So the key to getting into speech therapy is to develop experience and understand that whatever experience you're doing, you'll have transferable skills. The number of jobs I did prior to doing speech therapy is hilarious. I was a mascot for a radio station, an 8-foot bright blue pigeon that used to dance on stage. I know. I used to edit sports shows. I was a flair bartender. I used to work in hotels. I've done lots of different jobs, and with every job I'm thinking, right, what was transferable? And you communicate. So speech therapy is about communication, primarily about communication. And in every job you'll communicate. And therefore you need to think, right, when I'm looking at putting an application together to get onto one of these courses, one, I need to have experience in seeing what a speech therapist does. But two, I need to think, right, how is whatever I've done, what skills from that can I apply? And I can think of hundreds of skills from any job that you can apply in terms of working as a speech therapist. And I feel that, I mean, the biggest thing for me around speech therapy is the ability to be able to relate to people, and also the ability to listen and then communicate. But also to be able to get trust, and trust is hard to get. We're working with families, and this is what student speech therapists, they don't realize the second they graduate, they're working with some of the most challenging families, because these families have fought for years to get that service, and they're going to be one, grateful they got the service, but also two, angry that they had to fight for years to get it. So you need to think, right, that the resilience of that family and the skills they've had to create and the resources they've had to use in order to get that service. So therefore, things like customer service experience, working at Tesco's and being able to manage those kind of challenging families, because the challenging families are the ones you get the most out of eventually, and they're the ones that turn you into the best speech therapist. So yeah, I mean, so the best place to look is the Royal College of Speech Therapists. They've got kind of set guidelines in terms of which universities you can study at, and there's lots of different kind of courses out there. But the first thing you have to do is kind of look at which universities you want to apply to, and then also start to gather experience. So you don't have to be a teaching assistant. You don't have to work in a charity. You don't have to get experience with adults who've had a stroke. It's helpful if you do, but these have become difficult opportunities because so many people are trying to do it. And therefore, look at what skills you have and how they are transferable. I hope that helps.
I'm sure that helps. Thank you. Another question I've got here is, can all speech and language therapists diagnose verbal dyspraxia?
Nope. Well, there's a trick. I can be controversial, and I don't like being controversial because I put my neck out a lot. So all speech therapists have to be registered with the Healthcare Professions Council, so the HCPC. We don't have to be members of anything else, but we choose to be members of the Royal College of Speech Therapists because it's a good organisation, and they're the ones fighting at government level for funding, and they provide lots and lots of resources, etc. So we recommend HCPC and Royal College of Speech Therapists, but the HCPC is our statutory body. If you're not a member of them, you can't practice as a speech therapist, and you can be struck off by the HCPC if you get complaints, etc. And the reason I'm saying this is one of the HCPC guidelines is to make sure that you are working safely. There's lots of guidelines, but one of it is working safely, working effectively, but also working within your remit of clinical experience. And therefore, technically, any speech therapist can diagnose. What was the exact term you used? I caught you out there. You've muted yourself as well.
Got my grandson in the background.
Yeah,
it said verbal dyspraxia.
Yes.
Verbal dyspraxia. So
technically, any speech therapist can diagnose developmental verbal dyspraxia. That's the official term. And it's a different term in America. I think in America it's called apraxia of speech. So they can do it. However, very few will, because it needs to be part of their clinical specialism. And your clinical specialism is all about how much additional experience and training you've had to make sure you are able to work and you're able to meet that HCPC standard of working within your remit. I work with children that have developmental verbal dyspraxia, but I've 13 years experience of working with pediatrics, but it's typically with autism, ADHD, etc., with some developmental verbal dyspraxia. And therefore, I don't feel I have the experience and the clinical skills to diagnose it. I know what to do in order to treat it, but I don't have the confidence and skills and experience in order to diagnose it. And therefore, I would be referring out to the people that I know that do, because in any type of work, we specialize in different areas, and then there is a huge number of pediatric areas that you can specialize in. And just because someone's a child speech therapist or a speech therapist working with NHS with children in a mainstream school, it doesn't mean they have the skills and additional experience and additional training in order to diagnose something such as verbal dyspraxia. And therefore, lots won't. You may end up with a diagnosis of a speech disorder. You may get a diagnosis of oral dyspraxia, but you may not get the diagnosis of developmental verbal dyspraxia. The best thing you can do is the main kind of hub for verbal dyspraxia in the UK is the Nuffield Dyspraxia Centre. It's in London, and speech therapists in the NHS and private can make a referral to the Nuffield Dyspraxia programme, to the Nuffield Dyspraxia Centre, and the Nuffield Dyspraxia Centre can assess and diagnose dyspraxia or verbal dyspraxia. and any therapist can make this referral. It's an NHS service. It's not something you'd have to pay for. There's a waiting list. But the therapists that work within this centre are specialists in this area. So yeah, I mean, so the long way around is, yes, anybody can, but not many will, because we have to make sure we don't fall foul of the EHCPC, because if we do, we can be struck off, and nobody wants to be struck off.
Thank you for that. Okay. It's nice sometimes to hear many professionals admit, because I think the problem that a lot of us have as parents is if we don't understand what the terminologies of the roles of a speech and language or education psychologist or OT, parents seem to always, I won't say use the word demand, because I know what I was like when I first, my son was first diagnosed. I
demand everything for my children.
I'll put it this way, I think I just keep on asking for things, not knowing what it was, because we just saw these terminologies on on the statement. So for me right now, I just feel that parents need more understanding, that once the child gets diagnosed, to know what it is, and speech and language therapists to know what their roles are, because again, we've always been told we need speech and language when it goes to tribunal. And then you notice that even though the tribunal will be in our favour, but you notice that we still don't get the numbers which we've been given. So it's so important that it's something that we need to educate ourselves on, to make sure we know why we're asking for speech and language, because maybe what we're asking for is not what we may need all of. That's
true.
one.
Very, very true.
A second question that I missed, because I didn't realise, it said, do speech and language therapists also assess the impact of behaviour has on language and vice versa?
It's a tricky one, that. I like tricky questions.
She's a TA, so that's why she's asking.
So yeah, I love it. So when we're assessing, so if I'm assessing a child for an appeal, for example, I would consider everything. So I'm a detective. I have to look at everything. I have to look at the presentation of behaviour. I have to look at what a child is doing and what communicative behaviours they're using. And I know all behaviours are communication, but what I'll call it a communicative behaviour. What they're using in order to access what they need, or in order to avoid doing something. And there's lots of reasons why behaviours exist and why they're communicative behaviours. So in the long way around is, yes, we do. We have to look at everything. But this is where it's so important that speech therapists remember their remit, and also remember that we're part of a multidisciplinary team, and therefore TAs, teachers, SENCOs, parents, psychologists, we're all part of the same team. We should be all trying to work out, why does Johnny do this? And when he does this, what does he get from doing this? So we should be doing it. Again, when you're looking at a limited resource, it's hard to say that, well, it's something we should be doing, but it's hard to say when someone's not doing it, that they're doing the wrong thing, because they're doing the best with what they can. But there's no reason why we shouldn't be fighting for them to be doing everything else as well. I've seen hundreds, I'd say thousands of ABC charts in my life. I used to get sent them on a regular basis for every single child I was working with in a particular specialist setting. And ABC charts are great, but but nobody analyzes them. No one has the time to sit back and look at what happened before the behavior, what the behavior was, and what happened after the behavior. So this is a challenge. We should be looking at behavior and how behavior is communication. We should be analysing it as part of the assessment. But the challenge is, we don't have the time. I have the time because I work independently. I can spend 10 hours doing an assessment. I have complete flexibility, but NHS therapists don't. And it's easy to sit back as a private therapist and say, look, you're all doing the wrong thing, but they're not. They're using the resources in the best way they can. And I think that more pressure needs to be put on all commissioners to be paying for more hours, so that what we know as best practice can exist. And it isn't just speech therapy, it's the psychologist as well. So if you're looking at behavior, then you have to be looking at from a psychology perspective. And that's where the speech therapist and psychologist, with definitely the TA, definitely the teacher, the SENCO, the parents, they sit round a table and they have a team around the child meeting. They say, right, why is this happening? And in schools I've worked in, I've worked in lots of specialist settings across London. We'd have the opportunity to do this as a multidisciplinary team, but it takes a lot to do that, because even the meeting itself is maybe six hours of people's work. That's not then being used to deliver therapy or deliver training. And when you've got a limited resource and you're using that resource to do what people see as admin, and commissioners, when commissioners look at speech therapy, they look at how many contact hours a child gets or a service provides. And a meeting about a child is not classed as a direct contact time. It's classed as time for the child, but it's not classed as direct contact time. So even when it is on a statement or an education healthcare plan and it's quantified as 10 hours of speech therapy a year, the 2 hours of meetings for every professional to attend to work out why behaviour exists and how to work through it isn't included unless it's written in. And even then, 10 hours of speech therapy per year is gold dust on an EHCP, unless you've gone down the private route and paid legal fees, etc. Usually you're looking at 3 hours maximum per year. And out of those 3 hours, we still need that meeting to go ahead in order for the work to be effective. So yeah, yes is the answer.
Thank you. Next question was, how can you tell the difference between a child who needs speech and language intervention for language development and a child that may just be a bit behind in developing speech at 3 to 4 years old?
We use developmental norms. So psychologists and speech therapists have spent many years working out what typical language development is. I'm developing a resource as well, which allows parents to log in and look at, it's essentially my 4 children and videos of my 4 children from birth up to however old they are. And therefore you can compare all 4 of them at age 1 year, 3 months, 4 years, 2 months, whatever. And then you've got the text that goes with it. And essentially because of lots and lots of studies across the world, we know what typical language development looks like and typical social skills development looks like. And therefore, when you're comparing a child with with this scale, you can say, even without doing a standardized assessment, you can say this 3-year-old has skills has play skills of a 3-year-old, but speech skills or expressive language skills of a 1-year-old, but understanding of a 2-year-old. So you're able to work out kind of how this child is what they call, it has an uneven or spiky profile in terms of their communication. And then based on that, you can then work out as a therapist what would work for a child in this situation. So for some children, you have to look at everything when you're looking at intervention such as direct speech therapy, because some children, direct speech therapy is not going to have an impact because you need to look at the environment first. You should look at the environment first either way, but with some children, there might be so much going on at home or at school that direct intervention, so half an hour, even half an hour a week, is half an hour out of lots of other hours that's going on. So the likelihood is that these individuals the family might need particular guidance in how to communicate with their child. And it might be something called parent-child interaction, which isn't you're doing it wrong. It's let's look at the research and how you can just change things a little. And we all benefit from people watching us and saying, right, just change that a little bit to do this way. And the therapist can model the way to interact with the child and how to push them forward. So I kind of forgot the question and I've gone around in a big circle, but I do feel like I've answered it in a way, in the fact that it's child specific, but also environmental, and also considering where the child is in terms of their whole overall holistic skills in comparison to typical developing peers.
Thank you. I understand. I think you answered the question.
I don't think I understand, but I've just gone around in a big circle.
I think, again, as a parent, sometimes we do rely on the professional. And if the profession doesn't understand the role of, no, I won't even say the role, basically it is respecting the role of the speech and language therapist, regardless if they're NHS or independent. But sometimes because we feel as parents, I suppose, where the local authorities bring in NHS and you see that the report doesn't still give a true reflection of your child. So maybe why sometimes we do go to independent to make sure that we're getting the best information and not just someone making assumptions. And I think being direct as well, I sometimes feel as a Black mother, I'm going to go back to people say you shouldn't talk about race and autism, but I'm going to be very honest. Sometimes because of cultural differences, you'll find that the assessor won't able to pick up some of the challenges because of, say, for instance, if the person is from the BME or Black and Asian community and they are a specialist, they may not have been trained because they've been trained the old way, ticking the boxes, and they've not looked at the cultural perspective of when they're assessing that child. And I can say that from my own experience when I look back at the sort of comments that were made about my parenting skills, was that it was all about what I was doing wrong. And now with my son being at 17 and looking at my daughter's 14 and 19, I can see that cultural perspectives does need to be put into when they're assessing people of, that are not of.
I mean, when we do this, when speech therapists train, so when they're undergraduate, kind of the BSc or the MSc training, there are elements of looking at culture. So there's a module on social linguistics. So that looks at society and linguistics and how kind of in a sense the very basic cultural implications of language development and how language develops in different cultures, because it is different. But that is a tiny couple of hours here and there in terms of the overall course. And the only way that I have learned about other cultures isn't through reading books. It's through working with families from lots of other cultures and working abroad, so working in lots of different continents, cities, to gather that experience. But again, when you've met one child and one family with autism, you again have only met that one child and family with autism, and culture plays a big part. But remembering that you can't just apply, because you've met a child from Nigeria, you can't apply your experience of that child in Nigeria against every family from Nigeria. That would just be absolutely crazy. But so there's a way that it has to be tailored. And the only way to tailor the way that we assess and we give therapy and we train people is to spend time with them. But we don't have the resources to spend time with them. And therefore, what you end up is a generalist approach, and when you look at the training, the generalist approach is very much based on kind of past evidence based primarily around people like typically white. Therefore, you're not going to get a tailored approach that works for everybody. So no, I totally agree. There's a huge job to do. The big thing at the moment now, because of the Black Lives Matter movement, the Royal College of Speech Therapists has had to incredibly up their game. They are being called out left, right and centre by BAME speech language therapists who have been working for years, and they're shouting, wait a second, I've been looked over for promotion. I've been looked over for X, Y and Z, and now things need to change. And it's taken this to start change, and how much change this will create, I don't know. Because essentially, speech language therapy is a white middle class profession, and there's no way of getting around that. But what we're doing, and what I can see as a profession, is the voice of everybody is now shouting, right, we need change. Because how can I, as a white working class guy, turn up to a house of a family from a completely different culture and me expect change? And it also goes back to, we said before we started this, I said one big thing, and one of my biggest passions is working with dads, because dads are often absent no matter what culture. So they're absent when I go and do therapy, they're absent when I do assessments, because they're typically out for the day. Whatever they're doing during the day, they could be working, they could be socializing, but they're not there during the therapy sessions. I've got a family from Russia at the moment, and the dad's there for every session, and it's weird because dad's there and mum's there, and I'm like, okay, I really feel like I'm being judged because someone's here, but it's great. And there needs to be more engagement, but I think that also goes back down to diversity, because there's very few speech therapists that are male. You look at, I think it's less than 0.5% of male speech therapists. And then if you can imagine, they've got a tiny percentage of BAME speech therapists, a tiny percentage of male speech therapists. where are the black and where are the BAME speech and language therapists that are male, that males can connect with and dads can connect with? And there needs to be a humongous push in that direction, and kind of a big positive push, because I can engage with dads really easily because I'm a dad, and I get being a dad. I have a very stressful family of 4, actually family of 6 if I include the 2 adults and then the dog. But it's a really important issue that we need to be looking at absolutely everything in terms of diversity. And if we want to affect change for a child, we need to affect change with both parents. No matter if the parents are together, we still need to be exacting change across both of them.
Amazing. Like we said before we start recording, or before we came on, it's one thing where everybody seems to think that they always say, "What about me?" But then they've got to realize there are communities out there who have always been missing, or they've been there. So having representation is so important, because if you've not been in it or seen it, you're never going to understand. But the reason why I think what was so special about you, when I did my research and you said you were happy to do this webinar, was that you have traveled to Nigeria, you have gone to Dubai. See, I've done my research on you. Yeah. And it makes such a big difference. So it shows that you're not just talking lip service, you actually understand why it's so important that when you are assessing families, you understand about the cultural values that come into play. So thank you for that, and thank you for being honest, because sometimes when you ask professionals, sometimes I think they put their back up and thinking that yes, we understand, but I know from what I've picked up on a lot of families, is that when you look at their core assessments, even my own, down to reports, is where they seem to keep going back to single mothers or language breakdown of communication. So the dialect gets lost, and I think it's so important that as parents, if we are struggling, is just say, look, I want someone that can come into the meeting with me. Not that we're trying to bully the professionals, it's because we've realised that we've been misunderstood. So thank you.
I think the key there is in your training, and then when we're looking at working with families from other communities, when I say other cultures, other communities are rubbish. The guidance is typically take a translator.
Yes.
What does a translator do? How is a translator? So yes, a family speaks Yoruba. That ain't gonna help me when I'm assessing in English with a Yoruba translator. Yeah. But that doesn't tell me anything about the culture. It just gives me a word for word translation to what's being said. But that was always seen as best practice. So, and that's the surface level of what we see, which is very much what language is someone speaking. And then the old guidance used to be, all right, you speak more than one language, go back to just using English, which again, that is damaging. It's damaging heritage, it's damaging culture. So I mean, thankfully not the guidance, but thankfully the way that we work with families who speak more than one language, for example, has changed. And now we are pushing that we need to be using more than one language, and we respect that because it's a link back to culture. But no one's really scratching the surface of culture and the difference between my Bradford heritage and your heritage, and how I can't come in and say, wait a second, you need to do this, this, and this. And where's Dad? Because Dad, you need to do this, this, and this. We need to understand it. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. It's funny that there's a podcast now for speech therapists called SLT Time. And SLT Time is it started after this the BLM, and now there's a large group of speech therapists trying to educate other speech therapists about culture. And there's quite a few. I mean, it's positive. I mean, in America, there's because we're known as pathologists in America, so we're speech and language pathologists. It's exactly the same role. But there's a social media kind of push called SLPs of color, and then also SLTs of color. So there's become more of a push in terms of, right, let's expand in terms of, and also let's question what the status quo is. And it did take the Royal College of Speech Therapists time to create a statement around Black Lives Matter. The main day went a few weeks ago, and nothing was said. And then the newly qualified therapists started shouting. And these are people that are new to the organization, and they were screaming. They were getting 500-600 retweets, and their voice amplified. And then because of that, the experienced therapists started to help them. And now we've got more of a movement in speech therapy. But again, it's a lot of work needs to happen in order for us to know and understand cultures better, and then give our advice, which is actually tailored, rather than just, like you say, lip service.
Thank you for that. Because, you know, I was speaking to I think it was a police sergeant in the week, and I turned around and was trying to say that it seems that people that seem to be scared to use the words black and Asian, I feel that we just have to say it for what it is, because what's happening is when we use that word BAME, we don't know exactly how many people within that acronym is of a particular community. So say it for what it is, so that we know who we are seeking for that information to get back to. Thank you for that. And I'm sure there's people who are listening, you know, finally we can talk without anybody feeling that we're jumping on something, when we know racism or and discussion has always been a sensitive topic, but we have to talk about it so that we can help people and families in this current situation that we're in. Another question, and it's something I've been seeing pop up quite a lot, especially when we were doing Teen Mums with Carly Jones, was, do you have views on the role of interoception in autism and how a speech and language can help?
What's interoception?
Have you never heard of it?
I've got two screens. You know, I'm gonna.
From what I've picked up on it, it's Tanya. Can you help me, please?
I love it.
So Chris, interoception is like the eighth sense. So you've gone beyond the normal senses. Proprioception. Interoception is this understanding the feelings within your own body. So Venessa and I are hoping to do a webinar in interoception, because from my research and my personal experience, so my daughter developed an eating disorder. She's autistic. She's now 19, recovered. But a lot of the research I undertook, I started to realise that from a very young age, she didn't understand when she was full. She didn't understand when she wanted to go to the toilet. She's very eloquent, but she would say, "I've got stomachache. I've got stomachache," and her dad and I would say, "Liv, have you been to the loo?"
Right.
And it was from that. But when she developed the eating disorder, we realised that it was swinging both ways. So when she was full, she didn't realise she was full. So when she was young, if we went to something like what's it called, where you go and it's a buffet, that's the word I'm looking for, thank you. When you go to a buffet, because it's not like at home where food was limited, she would eat and she would make herself sick. She would literally just keep eating and not know when to stop. And we always thought this was really odd, but because it would only happen a few times or so many times a year when we were out at these events, we didn't really understand. When she developed an eating disorder and actually starved herself, we started to think, hang on, this is all linked. And I don't think necessarily the people treating her understand either, but it's because she's quite eloquent, she was able to explain as she got older that then she started to have real feelings. So the pain of being empty gave her a feeling that she could recognise because it was so extreme. So interoception, there's a lot out there about the links with emotions and regulation, about there's a lot within the community, autism community, about not being able to understand pain. So a lot of people, my daughter broke her elbow, I was told at hospital it can't be broken, she'd be crying. No, it was really badly fractured. She just doesn't experience pain in the same way. All of those things, they think that there's a link between, certainly with the eating disorders, but it might explain self-harm in autism. It might explain quite a lot of stuff, and I feel quite I really want to get parents understanding it, because I don't think it's talked about a lot, and I just wondered if you'd come across it, because we've got an occupational therapist that specialises in it, that we're hoping to get to talk, and Judy Eaton has agreed to talk with us as well, because she feels very strongly, and I wondered from the speech and language community whether that was something they were interested in.
So from my perspective, I'm obviously very interested, because I'm still learning. I've worked within autism for about 16 years, but I am still learning. I do lots of courses. I'm constantly learning. And from my perspective, when you were talking, there's one test that I know doesn't identify this, but it gives you a bit of an indicator. and that's your diagnostic assessment. So the ADOS,
Yeah.
and with a module 3 ADOS, you look at feelings and emotions, and you first ask someone what makes them feel happy, and then they'll give you a list of things that make them feel happy. And then the next question is these are not exact questions, but the next part of the question is, what's it feel like inside? And the vast majority of individuals that I've done a module 3 ADOS with, so these are the verbal individuals with autism, is they cannot say, they can't formulate, they can't produce a sentence that states what it feels like to feel a particular way. So I guess that kind of addresses at a very basic level this, but I'd never considered it. And it is definitely, I mean, the reason I do these I agree to do these webinars is I learn from them as well. And I feel like I take a lot away from that. I'm going to do a lot of reading around this, because when I work with adolescents at the moment, primarily adolescents, primarily on social interaction skills. And social interaction and social communication, we cover emotions. And when we're covering emotions, we're covering how things feel, but I don't think we consider this yet. And the social skills programs that I use are kind of the evidence-based ones that I can't see where they've covered this at all, or they've covered it on a very surface level. So I think it's really interesting. It's something we need to be reflecting on.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about anxiety, I know with my daughter, she would be anxious, but she didn't understand that feeling. So we had to explain to her, well, does your stomach start getting queasy and those sorts of things? Because only then did she sort of connect the two together. Because before she just had this feeling, but she didn't know what it meant. And it's interesting, obviously there's not been enough research into why don't autistic people develop it in the same way.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. I mean, my example last night, my wife went out for a 2-hour slot where she's allowed to go to the pub, because you're only allowed 2 hours. So she went to the pub with her friends for a birthday, and my daughter didn't like her going. And my daughter's 7, and my daughter was crying in bed at bedtime. And I said, "What's wrong?" She's like, "Oh, I'm having a heart attack." I'm like, "Are you sure?" I don't think you are. And she was really, really upset. And you could see her anxiety was kind of, you could feel the anxiety in the room. And her words were, "I'm having a heart attack," and there were tears coming down her face. And then when we really explored it, and I was able to explore it because it was just me and her, and the other 3 were sleeping. You could see there's a worry and a kind of an extreme worry and then anxiety related to what was happening, that was linked to, she saw a child be sick earlier in the day and she hates people being sick. And then the addition to this was mummy being out with her friends and not being home where she's safe. So Izzy had all these things going on, and she's a very eloquent child, but she wasn't able to identify that this is actually anxiety, or what you're describing has a word. And we've introduced the word to her previously, but it wasn't something that she then linked back. And therefore she felt the physical symptoms, but and this is like I said, she isn't a child with autism, but I'm now able to, I'm going to research into what you said. I'm now able to think, right, well, actually, this is something we need to be working on, not just as working with children with autism, but lots of other children that don't have diagnoses seem to have a similar difficulty. I think it's about kind of, I agree.
Thank you. See, that's where we're all here to learn. And I think when we're in a place that we can learn and to agree to disagree, because I've been some places where some people just switch off thinking it's not that way. But like you said, you've admitted you don't know.
Of course.
And then some people, and you've admitted it, and it shows that Tanya's been a great support for A Second Voice, but at the same time, she's been a great support for me when I've had challenges with my daughter, because like I said, information for girls out there has been very minimal, but it's getting better. But when it comes to Black autistic girls, I've seen a bigger struggle in areas where sometimes I felt I'm on my own. So yeah, thank you, Tanya.
My issue is there's a lot of autism experts out there, and most people don't like to admit that they don't know something, and therefore they try and blag. I can't blag. I'm great at blagging in areas that I don't write. I've stopped writing webinars. I just do the webinar. I can blag it when I know it. If I don't know it, you will see through it, and you've got to act with integrity. And if I don't know something, hey, I don't know it, and I will know it. I'll know more about it by the end of today, and I will be learning, because I can see how this applies to my practice constantly, because I work, 99% of what I do is autism, and therefore I need to have a better understanding of this. So thank you.
Thank you. And that's, again, Tanya's full of knowledge, wealth of knowledge. So yeah, thank you, Tanya. Another question. What are your thoughts on prompt? We wanted to find a private speech and language for our son due to delays with the NHS. The one closest to us uses this approach. Our son is 4 and just this week has been given an ASD diagnosis. His speech is delayed but developing. So the question is, prompt.
Prompt has the strongest evidence base in pretty much the whole of speech therapy. Speech therapy itself has poor evidence bases for a lot of what we do, because not enough money is put into looking at the effectiveness of what we do. So on the whole, there's a database called What Works. I don't know if it's an NHS database or it's linked to the I2ndvoice charity. I'm rubbish at remembering things, but What Works is a really good place that if you Google What Works, join as a member. You just have to register, email address, etc. And then you can, in the What Works directory, you can search any approach that you've been told about, and it'll tell you the effectiveness of it and the typical, what I would refer to as dosage, who should deliver it, etc. So things like PECs are on there, things like prompts are on there, things like social stories. And it's a really good database. So What Works is a really good place to look. Prompt is, like I say, it's got one of the strongest evidence bases in terms of speech sounds, so working on speech sounds themselves. I know quite a few therapists. I was on the prompt training course, and I ended up having to miss it. But at the time I had a big team, so I gave my place to one of the members of the team. And there's quite a few independent therapists doing prompt training. There's a set level. There's levels that you have to do. So I think it's a level 1, level 2, 3. I think it goes up to level 4, and then there's like an enhanced practitioner. So it's a system that works on speech sounds, but it works on physical manipulation. So my only concern, and I don't know where the research stands with it, and I don't know how people do it in practice, but when you have to physically manipulate a child to produce a speech sound, with some children it's absolutely fine. With other children that have kind of hypersensitivities in terms of their sensory system, you can imagine how physically manipulating them might not work as well, or they might be averse to it. And therefore you might need a program beforehand with an OT to work on the sensitivities of the face and the mouth before you do something like prompt. If a speech therapist is doing prompt and they're trained in it, then they're the best person to ask in terms of what's their experience in working with 4-year-old with autism who may have sensitivities, and how would they do it. But as an approach, it is a fantastic approach. I know the NHS are starting to do it because the evidence is so strong, and they can't not do it if the evidence is strong. And I know there's quite a few private practitioners out there. The big thing about prompt also is a prompt therapist needs to have specific prompt supervision from someone who has more experience. I know the lady in the UK who brought prompt to the UK, and it's a very, very robust supervision scheme. So not scheme, supervision process, or whatever the word is. So essentially, it isn't a therapist just trying to do something. It'll be a very highly skilled therapist who's trained and experienced in using prompt, who's told by someone who's even more superior or more experienced in how to adapt what they're doing to meet the child's needs. So I think I'd say you're in safe hands if it's someone who's prompt trained, but make sure they are actually prompt trained. They'll have a certificate to prove that they are trained. There's not many cowboys out there, but make sure that you're going to the person that has the qualification to do it, because it's such a specific program.
Thank you. That's really great to hear, because I didn't even know what prompt was. I've heard the word prompt, but I didn't realise
It's great. I wish I'd done the training. It is brilliant. It's on my list.
Excellent. The next question, Lorna Bryan, and she's been a great support with the Second Voice from day one, I can say. A lot of information's helped me to understand it wasn't just about children on the autistic spectrum. It's looking at the adults' perspective, and those obviously that if they're non-verbal as well, we can't just look at those who are in mainstream school settings. While I was able to look at different perspectives and organisations respecting that there are maturer autistic parents out there as well as maturer parents who have got a voice and their voices are included as well. We've got here, her question is, how can you put pressure on commissioners when it is they who have the final say? Is there an appeal process? Does one go to ombudsman?
The way that I work, I don't usually have to get involved. And this is, so from my perspective, I work with lots of parents groups who are doing judicial reviews. They're going to their MPs. They're trying to meet with heads of services. They're trying to put pressure on commissioners. I know the Royal College of Speech Therapists is constantly putting pressure on government to have more funding for speech therapy in general. And these are very much local decisions. Doing speech therapy provision differs from postcode to postcode and from healthcare trust or local authority to a local authority. So it's, I mean, I guess I don't know how you'd put pressure on, because it's not something that I've ever done. But what I see other parents do is kind of join a collective of parents and usually lobby in their local MP, because their local MP needs your vote at the next election. And that means that they'll most likely take things higher. And they're lobbying your local MP and, in a sense, getting as much feedback from other parents, objective feedback, so positive and negative experiences of services, and pushing that way. It's hard to go direct to a commissioner because they're faceless. No one knows who they are. They're often a panel of people, and I wouldn't know how to contact my local. And they're called CCGs, clinical commissioning groups. I wouldn't know where to go in order to put pressure on my local CCG over in Caerphilly. Obviously Google will show me where, but I think going via local MP. It's hard to engage. So I think the hardest route is to try and do it via your local NHS team, because you're a local NHS team. Yes, they will most likely 99% agree that they need more funding and more provision. But I think it's hard for them because they can't. I mean, they do speak out, but I think it's hard to go via them. It's, in a sense, you need to go around them and show your support for the NHS and show your support for the local NHS team by, in a sense, showing how the massive impact they can have and taking it to the MP and kind of pushing it in that direction. The other thing is, these education healthcare plans are great, but they're on a case-by-case basis. So you can work for years to get an EHCP for a child and get speech therapy on there, but then the other 29 children in the class who may have a need, and depending on the type of school, they won't get it, but your child will. And when your child gets it as part of an EHCP, it often means that there's less provision for other children, because it's, again, that small resource has been spread out even further. It's something you should still be doing, but it's a difficult situation. So yeah, I mean, I think build communities and then fight as communities, and go via MPs. MPs have the voice and they also want your vote next time round, so use them as much as you can.
Thank you. I can say from doing a lot of campaigning, I know that NHS Wands with CCG, I'm doing the first ever BME Autism Hub helpline that's meant to start in the next couple of weeks. It is hopefully lessons to be learnt, so that I know that whatever I'm going to do from there, that I can bring it to other communities. Yeah. Trial and error, because as I've always said, when parents have been, injustice has been put in place, and when we're speaking, asking for help, when we've been failed, and I know with Lorna has, fought tremendously for her son. Sometimes when our children are put into a care home or residential home or secured unit, it's fighting a system who just don't understand, and they're always looking at us as the parents. So yes, I agree, we do need to get the commissioners to be more accountable for how they spend their money, and to make sure that the voices of those in the autistic community and those who are non-verbal that need to be heard. And I think they have been failed under COVID, and I know that.
Oh, definitely.
I'm getting lots of complaints during COVID, so it's something that we have to push. So Lorna, I will speak to you later on in regards to what we can do with NHS England, because they are looking to target the BME community for learning disabilities and autism, because at the moment nobody knows what's going on, and that's the honest truth. Thank you, Chris.
I think it's also helpful because there's lots of, I mean, what's difficult is there's lots of groups that are like this group, and what you end up is lots of fragmented voices. I think trying to work out how do you do this nationally, and how do you do it locally, but how do you join with other groups? Because an MP being asked the same question by lots of different groups, I don't think is as powerful as this is a petition, this is the number of families that this is impacting on, and being one voice, like you say, a second voice, but it has to be 1 second voice that everyone's pushing with. Again, that's challenging because it means that you've got two organisations that might have different. I mean, you should again essentially the aim should be the same, to get the most for the families and children with autism and SEN. So the overall aim is the same, but there might be different kind of politics involved.
That's the reason why I've been trying to push for the last 4 years. I was picked to be one of the members for the advisory group, for the Parliamentary Advisory Group. And that was one thing where if the Black, Asian, minority ethnic voices are not being heard, it is important. The APPGA is set up of MPs and Lords, and the idea is where it's cross-party. It's not a political, it's where they want everybody in their communities as MPs, that they can go back and hear the voices of those who've not been heard. So again, CCGs should be listening, and I know that from what I've seen in the mandates. Again, I can send out the information to everybody again, so that if you are having struggles within your local borough and they're not hearing you, it's to come back to me, and then I know I can go back to one of the next APPG advisory meetings to say, this is what's happening in this borough. Yeah. So that's something that a lot of people are aware of. Thank you, Chris. Another one we've got, I'll go to this one. Talking of multiculturalism, would a child that speak more than one language, if he is dyslexia, would this child have the same level of difficulty in their mother tongue than others' language?
I don't know where the research is with this, but I've literally just bought this book, and it's aimed at speech therapists, Dual Language Development and Disorders. It's a handbook on bilingualism and second language learning. It's a new book. I don't know how soon it's been published. I don't know how recent it was published, but it's a really, really good book. Apparently, yeah, I'll send a picture. But no, so it's something that I'm having to learn. I obviously working in Wales, we've got 2 languages. Lots of children that I work with are either bilingual, English, Welsh, but they might also have a third language, which might be a home language as well. So it's important. Yeah, it's something that research is being done on. But I mean, my experience is that you'll have difficulties across both languages, but with some children, it's not that straightforward. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that I'm learning from, and research is being done. So I'll send a picture of the book over.
Excellent. Another one is Module 3, ADOS for the verbal. What about assessing feelings for the non-verbal? I know the children always pop in when we do this.
Hello.
Yeah.
I'm working. I'll be down in about 10 minutes, okay? Okay.
The joys of being at home. I was in the kitchen last night. My children took the front room, so I couldn't even come in here. All right, yeah, so to say the question again, Module 3, ADOS for the verbal. What about assessing feelings for the non-verbal?
Wow. So obviously the ADOS itself covers, there's a toddler version, there's module 1 and module 2. So in terms of there's a toddler version for the toddlers, and then you've got the non-verbal, the developing verbal, and then the fluent language run, and then you've got the adult ADOS. But again, the emotions and feelings doesn't kick in until module 3 and 4. So that's when we expect that the child or the adolescent has to have language, or the adult has language. So from that perspective, it would be more of an informal assessment. Is he going to the house? It would be more of an informal. So yeah, it would be more of an informal assessment to look at someone's understanding of feelings. There's a particular assessment, it's got an old-fashioned one from the Cambridge Autism Research Unit. It's called Mind in Your Eyes. And Mind in Your Eyes is you show it to a child, you get them to tell you how that person's feeling based on just on their eyes themselves. But again, that's for verbal individuals. So yeah, I mean, it's for non-verbal. It is difficult to identify where they are in terms of understanding of feelings, but it needs to be functional. So we'd often look at labeling emotions, and it ends up being extreme emotions. So if they're having a meltdown, then we'd be labeling labeling the feeling they have at that time, and showing them a visual of that feeling and a word of that feeling, so that they start to associate that word goes with that. I've seen zones of regulation work for non-verbal individuals really well. So you don't need to have language, because then the whole point of zones of regulation is it's the ability to tell the difference between the colours and then relate the colours back to how you're feeling, and then have the strategies to move from how you're feeling to in a sense, to a more positive position. So yeah, it is. I mean, it is an area that we are struggling as speech therapists to work in, but I think we're using what tools are there.
Thank you. I mean, that is one thing I've noticed over the last 4 months doing a lot of Zooms. There was a lot of complaints from different perspectives, but one was that it's a lot of the families whose young children or adults who are non-verbal, and it's that lack of resources, lack of support, that when lockdown happened, requests for families wanting the support. So again, Lorna's question about the non-verbal, I think it's so important, because everybody keeps on talking about my son, who's mainstream verbal, is that it's all about the verbal. So I think it is about looking at resources. It is about making sure that when we do our presentations, that we have to forget that not all of the children that are around us are verbal.
I mean, the vast majority of kids that I work with, from a therapy perspective, are non-verbal, or what I call emerging verbal. So they might be vocalizing, but the vocalizations don't have a function at the moment, and that's where we're introducing things. I mean, everyone gets introduced to PECS at some point, and I think I did a tweet a few weeks ago about PECS not being that kind of that.
Saw that.
Just let's try it. Everyone must use PECS. PECS is brilliant. Doesn't work for everybody. There's another speech therapist out there, a guy called Ewan, and he's a specialist in alternative and augmentative communication. And Ewan, I refer on to him for the complex kids where PECS isn't working, where other things that I'm skilled in using aren't working, and he looks at other use of technology. So it might be either a particular app on an iPad that's tailored to the child in order for them to communicate, because someone can be non-verbal, but it doesn't mean they can't communicate. I mean, stick me in any country in the world and I am non-verbal. I can't speak other languages. I am rubbish. I did a linguistics degree, but I cannot speak other languages. So I'm non-verbal, but I'm able to communicate. And therefore, if someone is non-verbal, we need to be enhancing their communication skills in order for them to be able to express what they need. I mean, if you put me in a pastry shop in any country in the world, I will work out how to get exactly what I want, because I know what I want. And therefore, there's no reason why, if someone is non-verbal, we can't work out a system that works for them, that's functional, that allows them to access what they need to access and what they want to access. And also to develop the social skills, etc. So I mean, there's lots of technology options or technological options and kind of paper-based options out there, but it has to be tailored, and it can only be tailored if you've got someone who's skilled enough to do it.
Thank you, Chris. I mean, Gemma's gone now because she had to go off. But what she said, she totally agreed with what you explained earlier. She said the error in the system is that support is so compartmentalized that becomes a minefield for parents to access services. And when the child gets a diagnosis, parents are not told which other professions should be involved, or the organizations do not communicate, and parents feel they are told different things and sometimes don't relate to their children. and just thanking me and you for addressing it.
I've seen lots of children lately where they've been, that's fine, don't worry. Don't worry. Sorry, we're trying to work out the babies.
Don't worry.
Don't worry.
Lorna just turned around and said, it's lovely to be able to give your child a hug while you're doing your work.
Yes, definitely. But I've seen lots of children lately who have been given the diagnosis and immediately discharged or transferred to a service such as an autism team, and the autism team doesn't have the specialisms such as speech therapists, such as psychologists, etc., or occupational therapists. So I mean, there is a problem with the system, and speech therapists are part of the assessment usually, but then on diagnosis they're discharged, and that's where you've got this confusion as to why would I need to access a speech therapist when they're not part of the core team. But if you look at, I mean, the core teams across the world, speech therapists, educational psychologists, occupational therapists, have a core, a part of that core team around intervention for lifelong autism. And I think this is where my issue, one of the things I tweeted about this week is the issue that speech therapists a lot of the time have been replaced by ABA tutors. Because ABA is accessible, it's direct. You see a result, you get to see somebody come in on a regular basis. It's also about a quarter of the price of speech therapy. There's a role for two different professionals, and I'm not going to say whether I'm pro or whether I'm anti or whether I'm imbalanced in terms of ABA, because it's an approach that works for some families and they trust that approach. But when it comes to, I mean, ABA is applied behavioural analysis, but when it comes to intervention, speech therapists too often now in the UK have written themselves out of doing intervention. I mean, I looked at a statement last week, actually this week, so part 3 of the statement in Wales, and part 3 should say the provision the child needs. And for this particular child who is non-verbal with autism and ADHD, there's no speech therapy and also no reference whatsoever to speech therapy in his statement. So therefore, parents are like, well, he doesn't need a speech therapist, clearly, because the professionals have said he doesn't need it. And that is only taken me to come in and say, actually, no, you definitely need it. Who else is going to set up PECs and teach and all these other things? So no, I agree.
I have to admit, it took me to take my son to tribunal appeal this year to find out that he didn't have speech and language probably for a good couple of years. And he's 17. And you can see he was failed in many ways because he rejected it because he just felt he wanted to fit in, not realising a lot of damage. So again, if our children are around individuals who say, you don't look autistic, you're not autistic, they start to want to reject any therapy, any support, and that is what's happened to my son. So I can see, to any parent out there, just talk to your child and make sure that anybody that is giving them the wrong information, or you as a parent, don't listen to other parents, because your child's needs are going to always be very different. As I said, if you've met one autistic child, you've met one. So be very careful to reject good advice just because the other parent may think they didn't need it. That's my advice.
I totally agree.
We've got about 10 minutes left. We've got one more question from Esther. Esther?
Yeah. My question is that I want to ask, because they're neglecting my son on all the area from birth, late diagnosed as well. And then after tribunal, when I come from tribunal, they give the school the judge chose for my son was a special school. So they do another diagnosis from there, OT. So the OT say my son have so many problems in all the area.
Okay.
They need to support my son. So my question is that when we have a 6-week holiday, and this 6 holiday, I want to help my son because my son cannot read, cannot write. What did you suggest me? I want to have a one-to-one teacher, like a tuition, to support him. But I tried before since 2017. 2018, they said they can't continue because of the ADHD. He's moving too much, and the sensory issue as well. He's jumping over the place and screaming as well. And then, what did you suggest for me to help him as a parent? I cannot wait for social. All those people comes, a psychology local authority as a mother. I want to supervise. And this week, before the school will start, I want my son to be read or writing for me. He can't read, so that's my. Is it giving me too much stress?
So from a
what do you suggest for me?
From a
because
literacy.
When the OT do the assessment, they say he cannot sit down on the table properly.
Yeah.
He cannot. They give you how he can sit down. They provide some cushion. They provide some. He can hold even knife and a fork. So is it now they are teaching him about all those stuff? Is it giving me too much stress for that? What did you suggest for me for this week?
So from a writing perspective, so as a speech therapist, it's not an area that I don't work in writing, I don't work in reading. So I'm going to explain who does. So from a writing perspective, you're right, it's the occupational therapist, because when we're writing, there's a lot of things that goes on that is not just our hand holding a pencil or a pen. It's the OT that works on the writing, and they work on the muscles of the shoulder, the muscles of the arm, and then the fine motor skills in order to not just hold a pencil or a pen, but also to manipulate it and create characters, etc. So that's the occupational therapy perspective. And then from a literacy,
how about reading?
From a reading perspective, it doesn't fall under speech therapy, but it technically falls under the educational psychologist, which looks at kind of reading and then comprehension reading, but also the teaching team. So the teachers that are experienced in the teachers that are experienced in working with literacy, with children that are struggling with literacy. So you've got those the three main professionals: the occupational therapist, the educational psychologist, and the teacher. Tom, touched in my chair.
The tap. Esther, we can always meet in the week anyway, so don't think you're on your own.
Vanessa, I might have to go.
No, we totally understand.
There's something's happened. My wife's just popped out.
Don't worry.
But no, I am more than happy we can make this as regular as you want to make it. And obviously gather some feedback, work out kind of what the themes are in terms of what would help people the most, in whether a particular webinar on PECS delivery or intensive interaction, or whether the question answer system works better. I love what you're doing. I love the parents that are part of this community, and therefore you just tell me when you want to book me in again, and we just book a slot.
Are you sure? Because there's lots
not a problem.
Right, well, I don't come back to you, but you go. I'm just thanking you, because as I said, one thing from Lorna said, every question and the response to every question was dealt with so efficiently and with such ease by both you and Chris. I'm really thankful that Venessa put on this event and was patient and helpful. Obviously, again, lots of people having problems with logging in. So yes, we will be back, and we do it once a month, once a week. I don't know, because at the moment parents are struggling over the holidays. So we'll talk this on Twitter.
Yes.
Catch
right.
everybody
I'll
soon.
see you all soon.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.